Parliament for West Central St. James, Malahu Fort, broke ranks with her government colleagues and criticized the proposed legislation for the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA. Now, I may also ask you, listeners and viewers, just to pause here, and that's a breath of fresh air. We don't see this very often, where our politicians break from the political herd mentality that governs our politics and break with their party. Yeah, we don't see that very often in Jamaica. And so MP Malahu Fort raised her concerns in Parliament on Tuesday concerning the bill. During her contribution to the debate on the bill, her intervention was met by a standing ovation from the opposition benches. Yeah, I think we should have a video of that. But just to advise that once established, NARA will be a statutory body mandated to lead, coordinate, and accelerate recovery and resilient infrastructure projects following the damage wrought by Hurricane Melissa. It's intended to fast-track approvals and reduce bureaucratic delays with a direct reporting relationship to the Prime Minister. But according to MP Malahu Fort, the bill in its current form needs to be reworked.
We don't have the track record of power being exercised in a way to get things done quickly. We don't have the track record of the rest of government, the Prime Minister piloting the bill and the team to take into account the very valid points that have been made. The bill needs some reworking.
Thank you, Member.
Madam Speaker, the bill in its current form will not achieve the goals that are set.
Thank you, Member.
And so, Madam Speaker, this is too important for us not to have the kind of buy-in and take into account the very valid concerns that have been raised. So, Madam Speaker, on that note, I invite the Prime Minister piloting the bill and the team to take into account the very valid points that have been made. The bill needs some reworking.
Thank you, Member.
Malahu Fort there in Parliament offering her contribution to the debate on the NARA bill. Now, in reporting on this, I want you to listen to the Gleaner's report that was penned, I believe, by Edmund Campbell, I think it was. Let me ensure that I'm giving credit to, yes, Edmund Campbell, or our senior parliamentary reporter here in Jamaica. I listened to this story in a rare departure from Jamaica's parliamentary tradition. Backbencher and former Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Malahu Fort, on Tuesday cut through one of the most consequential pieces of legislation tabled by the government in recent times and told members of the executive bluntly, go back and rework the bill. Members of the opposition rose to their feet, banging desks in support of the former minister who exposed flaws in the proposed law and parted company with colleagues on the government benches in over and above party loyalty. When have we ever seen this being done in our political history? It doesn't happen very frequently. I want you to listen to the Gleaner's report that was in Jamaica. And so MP Malahu Fort raised her. We'll have that for you at the top of the hour. I try to wrap my comments up by about past, and then we take some calls, and then we can jump into that interview. And then, of course, we'll take some more calls thereafter. All right, so the first thing I want us to talk about today is Malahu Fort. Yeah, and I may say to you, remember her name. Yes. Why am I saying that to you? The JLP Member of Parliament for West Central St. James, Malahu Fort, broke ranks with her government colleagues and criticized the proposed legislation for the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA. Now, I may also ask you, listeners and viewers, just to pause here, and that's a breath of fresh air. We don't see this very often, where our politicians break from the political herd mentality that governs our politics and break with their party. Yeah, we don't see that very often in Jamaica. And so MP Malahu Fort raised her concerns in Parliament on Tuesday concerning the bill. During her contribution to the debate on the bill, her intervention was met by a standing ovation from the opposition benches. Yeah, I think we should have a video of that. But just to advise that once established, NARA will be a statutory body mandated to lead, coordinate, and accelerate recovery and resilient infrastructure projects following the damage wrought by Hurricane Melissa. It's intended to fast-track approvals and reduce bureaucratic delays with a direct reporting relationship to the Prime Minister. But according to MP Malahu Fort, the bill in its current form needs to be reworked.
We don't have the track record of power being exercised in a way to get things done quickly. We don't have the track record of the rest of government, the Prime Minister piloting the bill and the team to take into account the very valid points that have been made. The bill needs some reworking.
Thank you, Member.
Madam Speaker, the bill in its current form will not achieve the goals that are set.
Thank you, Member.
And so, Madam Speaker, this is too important for us not to have the kind of buy-in and take into account the very valid concerns that have been raised. So, Madam Speaker, on that note, I invite the Prime Minister piloting the bill and the team to take into account the very valid points that have been made. The bill needs some reworking.
Thank you, Member.
Malahu Fort there in Parliament offering her contribution to the debate on the NARA bill. Now, in reporting on this, I want you to listen to the Gleaner's report that was penned, I believe, by Edmund Campbell, I think it was. Let me ensure that I'm giving credit to, yes, Edmund Campbell, or our senior parliamentary reporter here in Jamaica. I listened to this story in a rare departure from Jamaica's parliamentary tradition. Backbencher and former Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Malahu Fort, on Tuesday cut through one of the most consequential pieces of legislation tabled by the government in recent times and told members of the executive bluntly, go back and rework the bill. Members of the opposition rose to their feet, banging desks in support of the former minister who exposed flaws in the proposed law and parted company with colleagues on the government benches in relation to some critical provisions in the bill. The Gleaner goes on to report the House was debating the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority NARA Act 2026, which, among other things, seeks to establish the NARA for the efficient, coordinated, and transparent management of time-bound reconstruction and resilience efforts to focus on building back better post-Hurricane Melissa to withstand future climatic and other weather events. The Gleaner report continues. Member of Parliament, let's skip over that there. Malahu Fort told the government that the bill in its current form would not achieve the goals that are set out by the administration. She cautioned that the bill places inordinate powers in the hands of the chief executive officer and the minister responsible for the authority. The government lawmaker said some of the functions of NARA may collide with each other, noting that it was not good practice for anyone to provide oversight duties to self. Commenting on Clause 4 of the bill, Malahu Fort said it speaks to the function of procuring goods, works, and services for the implementation of projects, programs, and plans. Additionally, she said it also highlights the function of establishing project management, compliance, monitoring, reporting, and risk management systems necessary for timely, efficient, and effective performance of procurement contracts. She said this may run the authority into some trouble and may invite all kinds of genuine concerns. She also warned against sweeping powers given to the minister, indicating that the legislation gave the responsible minister the authority to overrule decisions by regulatory bodies to achieve the goal of rebuilding and reconstruction. And a quote attributed to Malahu Fort here in this Green report says, and then in more than one place, the bill tells you that notwithstanding anything to the contrary in any other law, and also that when the minister steps in effect, the minister can do anything. That is how wide it is, she observed. The MP for St. James the West Central also indicated that in its current form, the bill would be sacrificing accountability for speed. Giving a more stark analysis, another person is mentioned there. I want to stick with what Malahu Fort offered, yes? And quite frankly, she didn't just disagree for disagreeing's sake. She laid down some cogent arguments to support why she's saying that the bill needs to be reworked. Now, Malahu Fort deserves high commendation for the political bravery she displayed in the House of Representatives this week. She deserves high commendation. At the risk of being politically ostracized, because that's a clear and present danger for this course of action, given the kind of politics we practice in this country. And one could even argue at the risk of being ostracized even further because she's no longer a member of the cabinet. She chose a path that is very rarely, if ever, taken by Jamaican politicians, who are more often than not afflicted by a kind of blindly partisan herd mentality. Our politics is not necessarily the place for independent thinkers. They want people to toe the party line. But instead, Malahu Fort has chosen to stand up for what she sees as right for the country. She has placed her country over and above party loyalty. When have we ever seen this being done in our political history? It doesn't happen very frequently. I certainly can't recall more than one instance of this. The only other time I can recall seeing anything resembling this kind of admirable political bravery, that is, one would say, worthy of emulation, is in the person of erstwhile Prime Minister of this country, Portia Simpson Miller. Many of you might not recall, but in 2004, the then opposition JLP moved a resolution in Parliament criticizing the government's failure to provide adequate funding for the Jamaica Fire Service, which was facing severe resource shortages. It was very bad. The opposition JLP was doing the right thing. As a cabinet minister at the time, specifically Minister of Local Government Mrs. Simpson Miller, was expected to vote with the government to reject the opposition's criticism. What did she do? Instead of voting against the resolution, she abstained. And I gather that's perhaps the only criticism of that move by Portia Simpson Miller, that she didn't go far enough. Instead of voting against, she chose to abstain, citing the poor state of the fire services in her own constituency and her inability to defend the government's lack of action on the matter. She suffered consequences for it. Her abstention was widely viewed as a breach of the Westminster principle of collective responsibility, which dictates that all members of a cabinet must publicly support government decisions or resign. The move drew significant ire from leadership within her own People's National Party, who viewed it as a sign of party disunity and a challenge to the then Prime Minister, P.J. Patterson. But while the party was frustrated, the abstention did something else. It bolstered Portia Simpson Miller's reputation among the public as a woman of the people who was willing to defy political norms, to stand up with her constituents and what they needed. This event is often seen and recalled as a pivotal moment that demonstrated the appeal that Portia Simpson Miller had among the common people. A word to Mrs. Malahu Fort. You may come under some pressure for this act of political bravery, this act of patriotism, one may say. But be encouraged by the fact that 2 years after Mrs. Simpson Miller broke ranks with her own party, she became Jamaica's first woman to serve as Prime Minister, the only one thus far as well. Am I saying Mrs. Malahu Fort should replace Dr. Andrew Holness as Prime Minister? No, that's not what I'm arguing. What I am saying, though, to Mrs. Malahu Fort and to those in the JP who might be thinking of punishing Mrs. Malahu Fort for this stance, or recent political history teaches us that the public, including those who vote, are prepared to offer princely rewards to political mavericks who put the people above party loyalty. We'll take the break right here and come back with more. Identify this bill as being eminently consequential to Jamaica's future, and the Prime Minister is right. You know, as a professional given to dialogue and debate, one of the things I've come to realize is that two things can be true at the same time. That's one of the things I've come to realize. And in this immediate instance involving Nara, several things are true simultaneously. What are those things? Nara is definitely among the most consequential pieces of legislation in our country's history. If Jamaica is going to rebound and rebuild and come back stronger and better, Jamaica needs Nara to work. The bill must be passed into law quickly, but not with undue haste that could lead to a weak law with several legislative loopholes that will effectively undermine the efficacy of the act and what it's trying to achieve. Prime Minister Holness and his team should carefully consider all the concerns being raised and integrate into the bill those suggestions that serve to strengthen the law. I'm not going to take every suggestion. And this needs to be done in the shortest possible time. And that last bit there is very, very crucial, because we definitely need to get cracking on reconstruction and getting the country going. And I'm back to the previous point. All of those things need to be done. Prime Minister is correct. The bill is needed. It's necessary, but it has to be done the right way. Again, several things can be true at the same time. The other issue I want to go to is Philip Paulwell, the opposition spokesman on energy and telecommunications, wanting Speaker of the House, Juliet Holness, to recuse herself from participating in deliberations of those parliamentary committees where she's not acting as chairman of the proceedings. So he's saying she shouldn't really be sitting as a member on these committees that you might have partisan adversarial interactions, saying the Speaker of the House should be above the fray, yes? And of course, with Westminster-style parliamentary democracies, that is the ideal. That is what you aim for. Philip Powell raised this matter during his contribution to the sectoral debate in the House on Tuesday.
I don't think this is right, Madam Speaker. I think if we're serious about our standing orders reform, and if we're serious about strengthening Jamaican democracy, that we must also be serious about protecting you and the role of impartiality as Speaker. And so I say respectfully, Madam Speaker, you really ought to resist your party's inclination to demean the office. I would advise in those matters where you're not chairing committees, you really ought not to remain on them.
And if we can go to the second clip in the next story there in the Run studio. So Philip Powell makes this argument that the speaker needs to be above the fray. And if taken at face value, Philip Powell is making a very cogent argument. Yes, the speaker needs to appear to be impartial in her handling of the parliamentary affairs, in presiding over the House of Representatives. Now, if taken at face value, and if you do your checks with what obtains in the Westminster style of parliamentary democracy, you would say Philip Powell is on to something. Yes? But if you dig a little deeper, you recognize that there are flaws in what Mr. Powell is suggesting. How so? He was pressed this morning by Nationwide's George Davis. And in being pressed by George Davis, Powell conceded that the standing orders of Parliament would first need to be revised to allow for his recommendations. Also, you're going to hear Philip Powell saying here that there are other things that need to be done in order to secure the chair of the Speaker from the cut and thrust of what is normally taking place in the politics. Let's listen to what Powell admitted.
Her position as Speaker overrides her position as Member of Parliament, and that's the reason why special privileges ought to be accorded the Speaker. For example, she really ought not to be making open representation on behalf of her constituents. She really ought to be able to get the things that she needs. That is how speakers operate in other countries.
But that's not how it works, though, and you know this very, very well, given your experience in the Parliament, yeah.
And that's the reason why I, as leader of opposition business, and my counterpart, along with the members of the Standing Orders Committee, we have a task to do to change our standing orders to make it more amenable to those principles that I'm advocating, which is that there should be absolute impartiality in the role and function of our speakers. And the Speaker ought to be lifted out of the political arena once you get into that chair.
So there's a tidying up that needs to be done, you're saying then, which includes your call as outlined in your statement, but the other considerations to make the Speaker not be in a position to be lobbying like a regular MP, then, if you want to call it that way. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There has to be fundamental reforms in the standing orders. And I really would love a situation where the Speaker, whoever that person is not challenged in his or her constituency at election time. But we're not there as yet. But I think the reform has to get to there, because you can't have a Speaker where there is doubt as to his or her impartiality, and where every time an opposition member gets up to speak, there is contention and war, open warfare, because we suspect the Speaker to not being a fair arbiter.
Well, let me put that to you this morning. Do you believe this Speaker is an impartial arbiter in the House?
I would say that when you...
All right, we can't stop it there. He basically goes on to say he doesn't believe that she's necessarily being impartial. But you know, Philip Powell is calling for the Speaker to recuse herself from these parliamentary committees on which adversarial cut and thrust politics takes place, because he's saying, look, it doesn't allow for the Speaker to appear as being impartial. Now, but you hear him admitting there two very crucial things. One, no open representation on the part of the Speaker. In places where the Westminster style of parliamentary democracy works well, let's say the UK, you know, no open representation. You take care, you ensure that the Speaker's constituency needs are met, and no challenge at the constituency level. None of those things are now in place. But we are calling on the Speaker to recuse herself when the situation on the ground does not befit what operates elsewhere that practice this Westminster style of parliamentary democracy. Now, how can Philip Powell be calling for the Speaker to recuse herself without these things being in place? That he, seeing how long he's being involved with politics, as George rightly put to him, how can he be calling for her to recuse herself? knowing very well, yes, that we really practice a kind of ceremonial brand of impartiality. We are calling on the Speaker to appear to be impartial when the reality on the ground is that the Speaker has to lobby just like anyone else to get things done. She's challenged in her constituency as well. We can't have our cake and eat it too, Mr. Paulwell. Before you call for the Speaker to recuse herself, you should call for those matters that need to be addressed, those that you admitted to this morning, to be addressed. That's what should happen. You can't put the carriage before the horse, Mr. Paulwell. And that is what you are attempting to do here. And once there is this kind of inconsistency in the nature of anyone's argument, we very often must now pivot to motive and question what exactly motivated the call in the first place. Why is Philip Paulwell calling for the Speaker to recuse herself? Is she causing problems at that level for them? We've seen clashes. Is this the hand of Peter and not really Philip, but the voice of Philip? The hand of Peter, but the voice of Philip? This ceremonial brand of non-partisanship and is that's being called for can't be justified given the current realities on the ground. The current realities, that dictate how our parliamentary democracy works right now. It does not follow. How can you be calling for her to recuse herself before you put in all the elements that would make for the Speaker to be above the fray? We can't have the Speaker below the fray and then turn and say to the Speaker, you must now operate above the fray, even though all of the actualities and realities on the ground require that the Speaker is a part of the cut and thrust of the politics. Impartiality can't just be merely ceremonial, Mr. Paulwell. Yeah, it must be more than that. And quite frankly, the best we can hope for, given the realities on the ground now, is that the Speaker abides by the standing orders. And from the looks of things, none of those standing orders are being breached. Yeah, we'll take the break right here and come back with at least one other thing I need to talk about, and then we'll take your calls. Soon come.